So basically, let's talk about your pre-Apollo era. How did you get to enter the astronaut corps at NASA?
Let me start back when I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1957. I was commissioned into the Air Force, and so in 1957 I began flight training, and right after, during my flight training, Sputnik was launched in October of 1957. So that sort of generated a space age impact on me. So I went off to Germany for, after I got my wings, so I was in Germany from 59 to 1962. In 61, Yuri Gagarin flew, and then Alan Shepard. The Air Force wanted me to go back to graduate school, so they sent me to MIT in summer of 1962, and the next year I began to work on the Apollo guidance and navigation system. It was a contract that MIT had to build. They were building this system, and so I began to work on that. And while I was doing that, I met some astronauts, second, third group astronauts, and they were really enthusiastic, excited about Apollo, and so I asked them, how do I, they really motivated me, so I said, how do I get that job? And he said, well, get your degree and then go to test pilot school and you might have a chance. So I followed their advice. Of course, I got my degree, and then I was assigned to test pilot school in Edwards Air Force Base in California. It took a year to get through test pilot school, so I graduated in the summer of 1965. And then the very next month, I think it was in September '65, I saw an article in the newspaper said NASA's having another astronaut selection. And so I read, well, I qualify for that. So in the military, you had to apply through channels. You had to go to your boss, and he had to approve and on up. Anyway, that's what happened, and 6 to 8 months later, I was announced as a selectee for that group that we started training in April 1966. So it was just stepping stone along the way that made some judicious decisions and listened to people, the advice of the older astronauts and my boss, and so it's just a fulfilling of a dream that only started in 1961, just a few years before that.
Okay. How was the first meeting with John Young, and how do you, what impression did he get to you?
Well, first time I met John Young, he was on the selection committee for our group. And so the selection committee, there were several, one of the original astronauts, Deke Slayton, the chief of the crew systems, John Young, several others. And so during the interview, I recall John as just being just a sort of laid-back guy, you know. He didn't come on very strong, but his questions were really penetrating. And so that was my first encounter. And then we got selected, and we went to work, and we all officed in the same building, and actually on the same floor. He wasn't my office mate, but I was down the hall from him, and we occasionally interface. And then a few years later, like in 1968, I got assigned to the Apollo 10 crew as a support guy. And John was the command module pilot on Apollo 10. So that gave us an interface, and my focus was basically on the command module. So I worked closely with him, helping develop procedures and all. And John was really a laid-back guy, and the first time you'd met him, you would shake your head, how did this guy get to be an astronaut? But I learned that his mild demeanor masked the most penetrating engineering mind I'd ever met. I mean, he was really sharp. In a briefing, his questions would zero right into the problem. But he came across, oh shucks, you know, and just sort of easygoing guy, but very, very competent. So I was really impressed with John, and we worked together, and then I was Capcom on Apollo 10. Then after they got back, I was up Capcom on Apollo 11 two months later. And after that, they had an announcement for the Apollo 13 crew. And so we were backup. We were chosen as backup. John was commander. Mattingly, Jack Schweikert was the command module pilot, and then I was lunar module pilot. So we began to work together, and we had personalities that didn't clash. We were, you know, both Southerners, if you will, so we had that background of easygoing folks, and so our training went really, really well. And then we got to, when I caught the measles before Apollo 13 launched, I was really sick, and I exposed everybody to measles. So Mattingly came back on our crew, and Jack Schweikert went on 13. And then John and I really worked really, really hard when the explosion happened on Apollo 13. And we ended up going to, of course, 35 hours in mission control, most of that time spent in a simulator, figuring out all of these new procedures to get the lunar module to drive this whole stack back to Earth. And so I was really impressed. Really, we'd been in the simulator before training, but John had some real insight into the systems and the dynamics of the machine, and so we worked really well as a crew. We complemented one another. I was more focused on the emergency stuff, and John was more on the overall, if you will. Being commander, that's his responsibility. So anyway, we became really close on 13 back up. Then we were called for 16, and as the prime crew on 16, and we ended up training over 2 years together. So we spent thousands of hours in the simulator. We became like brothers. I mean, you begin to understand how he's thinking. He knows what I'm thinking, and responses. So we became really a tight team, and I think it was reflected in our performance on Apollo 16. And then the last time I was close to John, we volunteered for backup on a 17, which was a dead-end job, but who knows, maybe they might get sick and we might be chosen to go and replace them. So anyway, it was again, about 6 months, about 6 months of training together, and I was always in wonder at John how he could pick up or zero in on the problem and help present the solution. So he was in the South. We have guys that laid back like that, we call them all shucks guys. But he was brilliant engineer and very insightful to problems, to what might potentially be problems. And so operationally, he was a tremendous influence on me and taught me a whole lot. And I just really enjoyed working with him on Apollo.
And besides work, after the Apollo era, did you still have
a little bit louder, please?
Oh, sorry. After the Apollo era, did you have still relationships with John Young and on a personal aspect?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but the relation.
Were you friends after the?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. We stayed friends until I left the space program in '76. Then I followed his career. We formed a group called the Ancient Astronauts. It was all the Apollo guys, and we'd have these meetings, yearly meetings, and I'd go back to. We didn't move too far away from Houston, and I'd go back for my physicals, and I stayed up with his career as a shuttle commander, and was very delighted for him to be chosen to pilot the first shuttle. And John, I worked with this guy, and he was the only astronaut to ever fly 3 different spacecraft, Gemini, Apollo, and Space Shuttle.
Twice each.
Mm-hmm.
Twice each.
Yeah.
Twice each.
Yeah, oh yeah, twice each, yeah. So other astronauts have had more flights, but they've all been in the Space Shuttle. And so John was very talented. He had headed the astronaut office, a brilliant engineer, brilliant commander, and so it was really a nice relationship we had until we were close friends until he died.
Going back to you and going back to Apollo 16, it was your first flight in space?
First and only.
First and only, yeah. But well flight.
Yeah.
Did you have any fear, any fear about riding the Saturn V, knowing how big it was, knowing the problems with Apollo 12 and etc.?
No, there was no fear. We were prepared. The record, you look back over the record of the Saturn V, it never had a failure. One time they had to shut down one engine on Apollo 13. But other than that, the Saturn performed flawlessly. So we were very confident in the Saturn vehicle. It was so tall, though, that as the engines moved at the bottom on this, that vibration would travel up the stack. And when it got to the spacecraft, it was a real vibration laterally, not pogo, but laterally. And I was a little surprised at that. It was stronger than I expected. But John was very calm, and we're go Houston. You listen to Houston, you go on trajectory, and so you just wrote it out after the first stage shut down. For in our case, 2 minutes and 42 seconds after liftoff. It got very smooth. Third stage, second stage, third stage, just real smooth into orbit. And so we dropped off the third stage after it pushed us out of Earth orbit into lunar trajectory. And then, of course, we were just riding in the command module. So the only time I had any fear, I guess, was at the end of our stay on the moon, and we were going to do some, I don't call it a joke, but something entertaining for and so we chose to do the Moon Olympics. and we were bouncing up, you know, 1/6 gravity. It was easy to start bouncing, and so I bounced, and when I did, I straightened up and went over backwards, and that was really scary. I was going to fall on my life support system, the backpack we called it, and had it broken, I was dead. So I just thought, do something, roll right. So I rolled to the right and broke my fall on my right side, bounced onto my back, and my heart was pounding, but hey, I'm still alive, and things seem all right. You could hear the pumps running and air still flowing, and I was pressurized. And so John came and helped me up, and he was very upset. Mission Control was even more upset, and that stopped the Moon Olympics. It was scary, and so that's the only time during the 11 days that I had a fearful moment.
Yeah, and it was televised, so we saw that.
Yeah, it was all televised.
Yeah,
fell behind.
We are 50 years away from Apollo 16 already. Do you have like deep thoughts about that 50 years away? What do you think about the Apollo era? Looking back from it,
Well, it was an exciting adventure. It wasn't spiritual. It wasn't philosophical. It was a technical adventure. You had a whole procedures to do on the moon. You wanted to do the job, and so you focused on each stop and what you had to do at each place. The rocks you had to collect, the experiments you had to do. So it was more of a thought of technical, but doing that in the background was the wonder of it all. I'm on the moon, and the clarity with no atmosphere, the clarity of your vision all the way out to the horizon, you know, just rolling mountainous gray of the moon, and you looked up and there was the blackness of space, and I never got over that. For 3 days it was just awe and wonder, excitement, adventure. You know, what's around the next bend? What's over there behind that rock? And let's go over there, John. And, you know, all of these things that excitement. You get caught up in the experiment, the exploration. You know, our photographs taken of our landing site from Apollo 14 only had resolution of 15 meters. So objects smaller than 15 meters you couldn't see. So when you started driving along, all these objects began to appear that were not on the photographs. And so it was very exciting and adventurous, wonder, and never once did I have fear except for that fall. Other than that, we felt right at home, and pleaded to stay for several more hours. You know, we were having so much fun. Due to our late landing, Mission Control didn't approve the extension, but and probably rightfully so. But we were disappointed. But now looking back 50 years back, I can vividly remember some of the major events. I don't remember each step, but certainly the major stops and the view from up on Stone Mountain on the second EVA and third EVA up next to North Ray Crater, which was 500 meters diameter, very spectacular spot.
And weren't you scared about John's way of driving the rover?
No.
Because he was really fast.
Well, it was, that was a venture. That was fun, yeah. It never felt like it was going to turn over. It bounced a lot, and it was like this, but it never felt like it was going to turn over. And so we were just yahooing it. We were having a great time. And he was a good driver. I was the navigator. And occasionally we were shoulder to shoulder or arm to arm. He drove with his right arm. I was in left side, and I had a camera, and I turned to take a picture and bump his elbow, and off we'd go and sort of make a S-turn. But it was fun riding a rover. We were strapped in very tightly, and so you just let her go, John, and we came down off of North Ray Crater, and the odometer or the speedometer would go to 17 kilometers per hour, and then that was max peg, but we drive down. It was off scale high, if you will, as we came down. That was bouncing like crazy, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's crazy to hear that from you. And you say you remember some great places, etc. But do you have like one big memory? Is something that hit you on the moon?
Well, the biggest, the most memorable moment was the landing. As I related these photographs that we practiced landing, they made a big model for the simulator, and we landed based on this model. Well, at 2,000 meters above the moon, the vehicle pitches down and you see the surface for the first time. And there were a lot of rocks and a lot of holes up there less than 15 meters. So it was a shock at first. And John said, I said, we're almost on track, but we were a little north and a little west. And so he had to start to maneuver, and as we got down close, the objective was to land on a level spot without a lot of rocks around and a lot of craters. And he did a magnificent job selecting that landing spot. And my job was to handle any emergencies, look out my side, make sure he wasn't landing on a rock, stay on profile, rate of descent, altitude, lateral forward velocities, and all of that stuff. So it's a two-man job. I was basically talking him down, and he was focused on selecting a good landing spot, and he did, dead level when we shut down.
To conclude this interview, what do you think about the American space program in general? Do you think Apollo was the big thing and then everything collapsed, or maybe you're more interested in the space shuttle era, or maybe what's coming next?
Well, during Apollo, it was all very dynamic. Decisions were made like this at NASA, and then while we were on the moon, they announced the start of the space program. I mean, space shuttle. And we were excited about that. You know, new vehicle, but we knew we would never go back to the moon with a space shuttle. It was just Earth orbit. It was a transportation system. And we were excited about that at first, but then 30 years later, that was still all we had. And they were building the space station, but we had, and once that got completed, most of our astronauts had to go to Russia to launch on a Soyuz to get to the space station. And I think I was disappointed in that they didn't announce about halfway through space shuttle. They knew it was going to wear out. And we were manning, we'd gone from adventure to science, and maybe that's okay. But it wasn't the drama of the dream of staying on the moon. And so after shuttle, they finally retired shuttle, let me put it that way, and we were working on a program called Constellation Orion, I guess it was, which was a return to the moon, but Obama canceled most of that, and we only ended up with one piece of it, and that was the command module, the Orion, which fortunately they still had, and they continued development. And then there was announced that after Obama, we would do a return to the moon, and it had to be resurrected, if you will. And so now it's called Artemis, and it's an exciting program. But it is disappointing. You know, it took 50 years basically to come back to that let's go explore. And I think we're going to see with the exploration through Artemis, NASA's going to focus on deep space, and the SpaceX's and Blue Origin are all going to do the near Earth stuff. And that's a good partnership. I'm all for that.
Yeah, but right now with the economic issues, we have to count on the international cooperation, not just the US, right? Do you think it's important?
Oh yeah, well, Artemis not so much right now, but I think it will be cooperation. And
the service module is European.
Yeah, ESA, the European Space Agency, wants to be involved. The Japanese, the Chinese, and the Russians are working on their own. You know, we're still flying with the Russians. It's strange that you know, they're doing this Ukrainian thing. We're condemning them, yet we're still sending astronauts to Moscow to launch on their vehicles. And strange relationship. The space program, our friendship with the cosmonauts is really strong. And right now they're both Russians and Americans and other nationalities on the space station. And the U.S., one of the U.S. astronauts is supposed to come down in the next couple of weeks on a Soyuz spacecraft. And yet we're, you know, we're sort of, governments is sort of at odds. Fortunately, the space program is more cohesive, I guess I'd call it. And so we'll see what happens. But I think that if this is all resolved, we're going to have this cooperation in the space station at least through 2030 or so, and then it'll be deorbited. After that, see how it develops on cooperation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr.
My pleasure.
Pleasure and real honor.